This is now. Welcome to the present moment. Hey friend, as you're entering the hypnagogic state, that liminal space between waking and sleeping, where your heart opens to wisdom and becomes naturally receptive to deeper truths, let these ancient teachings settle deep into your being. Tonight, I want to talk to you about a quality of mind that the Buddha identified as the root cause of human suffering. This quality of mind has many faces. Maybe you already experienced it while lying in your bed, replaying what your coworker said about your presentation, your mind spinning the same defense over and over like a broken record you can't turn off. Perhaps it was reaching for your phone again, knowing there won't be any new messages, but checking anyway because the silence feels too heavy to carry alone. Maybe it was standing in front of your closet, holding that dress you haven't worn in 2 years, but can't donate because you still cling on to the person you used to be. Maybe it was watching your partner laugh at something on their phone and feeling that sharp twist of needing to know what's so funny, who they're texting, or why are they not sharing it with you. Perhaps it was eating that second piece of cake, not because you were hungry, but because the sweetness promised to fill something you can't quite name, or scrolling through social media at midnight, comparing your real life to everyone else's highlight reel, each image making you feel smaller and more behind the life you ought to be living. This is what the Buddha called upadana, clinging or attaching to things, people, outcomes, places, even our own thoughts and feelings, as if they were permanent sources of lasting happiness, when they are, by their very nature, always changing, always fleeting. Tonight, we're going to explore this together, with the same gentle attention we might offer a dear friend who's struggling, not to fix anything, but to understand something profound about what it means to love, without clinging onto what we love. Now, take a moment now to settle into wherever you are. Let your body sink a little deeper into the surface that's holding you. There's nowhere else you need to be right now, nothing you need to accomplish. Just this moment, just this breath, just us exploring together what Buddha discovered about the human heart's tendency to grip what it treasures most. The Buddha taught that upadana isn't about not loving people or not caring about things. It's about the way we hold on to them as if we could make them permanent, as if our grip could somehow stop the natural flow of change that governs all of life. Think about water for a moment. When you try to hold water in a clenched fist, it slips right through your fingers. But when you cup your hands gently, the water rests there peacefully for as long as it chooses to stay. The Buddha saw that we approach almost everything in our lives with clenched fists. Our relationships, our bodies, our possessions, our ideas about how things should be. In our modern world, we have countless opportunities to practice this clinging. We attach to our appearance, desperately fighting the natural process of aging. We attach to our roles as parents, as professionals, as the strong one, the helpful one, the one who has it all figured out. We attach to our possessions, believing that the right house, the right car, the right amount in our bank account will finally make us feel secure. We attach to outcomes, needing our children to succeed, our relationships to last forever, our plans to unfold exactly as we've imagined them. But here's what the Buddha discovered through his own deep investigation of suffering. It's not these things themselves that cause us pain. It's our relationship to them. It's the way we cling to them as if they could provide something they're simply not capable of providing. Permanent security in an impermanent world. The Buddha didn't just speak about attachment in general terms. He identified 4 specific types of clinging that keep us trapped in cycles of suffering. Understanding these can help you recognize exactly where your own mind gets caught. The first is sensuality clinging, our attachment to pleasure and comfort. This isn't just about obvious indulgences. It's the way you reach for your phone when you're bored, seeking that little hit of stimulation. It's checking the refrigerator when you're not hungry, looking for comfort you can taste. It's buying something you don't need, because the purchase promises to fill an emptiness that no object can actually touch. The second is view clinging, attachment to our beliefs and opinions. This is when you feel personally attacked because someone disagrees with your political views. It's the way your whole identity crumbles when someone challenges something you've always believed to be true. It's making your sense of worth dependent on being right, on having the correct perspective, on others seeing the world the way you do. The third is precept and practice clinging, attachment to rules and rituals. This might show up as rigid thinking about the right way to do things. The person who can't sleep if their nighttime routine is disrupted. The parent who becomes anxious when family traditions change. Even spiritual practitioners can fall into this, becoming attached to meditation techniques or believing their particular practice is superior to all others. The fourth is perhaps the most subtle of all, the doctrine of self-clinging. This is our deep attachment to the story of who we think we are, the narrative about your personality, your strengths and weaknesses, your past and future. It's the voice in your head that says, I'm not the kind of person who, or I always, or I could never. This clinging to a fixed sense of self keeps us trapped in patterns that no longer serve us. The Buddha also taught about three fundamental drives that fuel all attachment: our attraction to pleasure, our desperate need to keep existing, and even our clinging to negative emotions like anger and resentment. Yes, we can become attached to our suffering. Think about the person who holds on to a grudge for years, replaying the same story of being wronged, or the way we sometimes cling to anxiety because it feels like protection, even though it's exhausting us. So when you notice yourself suffering, you can ask, which type of clinging am I dealing with here? Am I grasping for pleasure, defending my views, rigidly following rules, protecting my self-image, or holding on to pain? This awareness creates space between you and the attachment, which is the first step toward freedom. Tonight, let me share three stories that show how even those dedicated to letting go can find themselves caught in the web of attachment. These aren't stories of failure, but of awakening, because sometimes our deepest attachments hide in the places we least expect to find them, in our spiritual practices, in our identities as helpers, even in our attempts to escape life's natural difficulties. Each story reveals a different type of clinging that the Buddha identified, and how the very thing we think is protecting us might actually be the source of our suffering. The first is about a monk whose morning ritual became a prison he didn't even know he'd built. This monk had dedicated his life to the path of letting go. He owned nothing but his robes and his begging bowl. He had released attachment to family, to comfort, to reputation. He meditated for hours each day, cultivating what he believed was perfect equanimity. But there was one thing this monk couldn't release, though he didn't recognize it for years. Each morning, he would wake before dawn and walk to a particular spot in the monastery garden where he could watch the sunrise paint the mountains gold. He had been doing this for over a decade, and it had become more than a habit. It had become his anchor. The monk told himself this wasn't attachment. After all, he wasn't clinging to anything material. He was simply appreciating the natural world. But deep in his heart, he needed that sunrise. He planned his day around it. He felt agitated when clouds blocked his view. He even found himself judging other monks who slept through what he considered the most sacred hour of the day. This was what the Buddha called precept and practice clinging, attachment to a spiritual routine that had become rigid. The monk had made his morning ritual more important than the awareness it was meant to cultivate. One morning, The monk woke to discover that construction had begun on a new meditation hall right in the path of his cherished view. The mountains were blocked, his sunrise was gone, and with it came a grief so intense it took his breath away. As he sat staring at the wooden framework that now obscured his decade-old ritual, the monk began to understand something his years of study hadn't taught him. He had been attached without knowing it, not to the sunrise itself, but to the identity he had built around being someone who appreciated such things, someone who was awake while others slept. This was also doctrine of self-clinging, attachment to his image as the spiritually advanced monk who had access to beauty others missed. The construction continued for months, and each morning the monk sat in front of that growing wall, learning to love the sunrise he could no longer see. Slowly, he discovered that his attachment to the ritual had actually been preventing him from experiencing the awareness the ritual was meant to cultivate. When the meditation hall was finally completed, and he could once again see a sliver of the eastern sky, something had changed. The sunrise was still beautiful, but he no longer needed it to feel connected to the divine. He had learned to find that connection in the simple fact of being alive for another day. The second story is about a woman named Grace, whose attachment to her self-image nearly cost her everything she actually valued. Grace had always been the strong one in her family. When her parents divorced, she comforted her siblings. When her mother fell ill, Grace managed everything. When her brother struggled with addiction, she found treatment and paid for it quietly. Grace's whole sense of who she was had become built around being the one others could depend on. This was classic doctrine of self-clinging, this attachment to the story of herself as the strong, reliable caregiver, but it was also view-clinging, her rigid belief that love meant taking care of everyone else's problems. This identity served her well for years. She became a nurse, married a gentleman, raised 2 children while working full-time. Grace felt valuable, needed, secure in her role as the family's anchor. But bodies age, and Grace's began to betray the image she had built. First fatigue that coffee couldn't cure, then joint pain, then a diagnosis she kept hidden for months, terrified of what it would mean if she was no longer the strong one. Grace's attachment to being needed was so complete that when her adult daughter offered to drive her to chemotherapy appointments, Grace felt not gratitude but terror. If she wasn't the one giving care, who was she? Her clinging to her caregiver identity was literally making her sicker. The shift came when Grace's 3-year-old granddaughter climbed into her hospital bed and said simply, "Grandma, you smell like flowers." Not appreciation for her strength or competence, just love for her presence. In that moment, Grace began to understand what the Buddha meant about attachment to self-image. She had been so busy being the strong one that she had forgotten how to simply be herself. Her family loved her not because she solved their problems, but because she was Grace. Learning to receive care was harder than learning to give it had ever been. But slowly, Grace discovered that when she stopped trying to be indispensable, she became more genuinely connected to the people she loved. When she allowed herself to be human, tired, scared, fragile, her relationships deepened in ways that decades of caregiving hadn't achieved. The third story is about David, a software engineer whose experience reveals how sensuality clinging shows up in our modern world. Not in obvious ways, but in the subtle addictions that promise relief from life's natural discomfort. David had always been what people called a high achiever. He worked long hours, solved complex problems, and took pride in his analytical mind. But somewhere in his 30s, the demands of his job began to feel overwhelming. The constant pressure to innovate, the endless meetings, the expectation to be available at all hours, it was wearing him down. That's when David discovered his refuge, late-night gaming sessions that stretched until dawn. What started as an hour of decompression after work gradually became 3, then 5, then entire weekends lost to virtual worlds where he felt competent and in control. This was sensuality clinging, not to obvious physical pleasures, but to the subtle satisfaction of digital stimulation. The games provided constant feedback, immediate rewards, and the illusion of progress without the messiness of real-world challenges. David told himself he was just relaxing, just having some harmless fun. But deep down, he knew something had shifted. He was choosing virtual achievements over real relationships. He was avoiding difficult conversations with his partner by disappearing into games. He was using digital pleasure to numb feelings he didn't want to face. The attachment wasn't really to the games themselves, it was to the state they provided. The escape from uncertainty, from responsibility, from the discomfort of his actual life. David was using pleasure to avoid the natural difficulties of being human. The wake-up call came when his partner of 7 years moved out, leaving a note that said, "I miss you, even when you're sitting right next to me." David realized he had been so busy escaping into virtual worlds that he had abandoned the real world that actually mattered to him. Breaking free from sensuality clinging didn't mean David could never play games again. It meant learning to recognize when he was using pleasure to avoid rather than enhance his life. He began to notice the difference between enjoying something and needing it to feel okay. David learned to sit with discomfort instead of immediately reaching for distraction. When work stress arose, instead of automatically opening a game, he would pause and ask, "What am I trying to avoid feeling right now? What would it be like to just feel this without needing to escape?" Gradually, David discovered that the feelings he had been avoiding, anxiety about his career, loneliness in his relationship, uncertainty about the future, were actually quite manageable when he stopped fighting them. These three stories show us that attachment appears in countless forms, some obvious, some subtle. The monk's spiritual routine, Grace's caregiver identity, David's digital escape, all were attempts to find security and meaning in an uncertain world. The Buddha's wisdom isn't that we should eliminate all routines, stop caring for others, or never enjoy entertainment. It's that we should hold these things lightly enough that we don't become imprisoned by them. As these stories settle into your awareness, you might recognize your own patterns of clinging. Perhaps you see yourself in one of these characters, or maybe your attachments take entirely different forms. This recognition is not a judgment, it's the beginning of freedom. The practice isn't to eliminate these natural human tendencies, but to hold them with awareness, to love without possessing, to care without controlling, to enjoy without becoming dependent, to create routines without becoming rigid. Right now, as your body settles deeper into rest, you can practice the art of gentle release. Notice any places where you're still holding tension, in your jaw, your shoulders, your hands. These physical holdings often mirror the mental attachments we've been exploring. Tomorrow will bring new opportunities to practice this wisdom. You'll notice moments of clinging to outcomes, to pleasures, to being right, to staying comfortable. And in those moments, you can remember what we've explored together tonight. That freedom comes not from having everything go your way, but from learning to flow gracefully with whatever comes. Rest now in this understanding. Let these teachings settle into the deeper layers of your being. Where real change takes root, trust that your heart already knows how to love without clinging, how to care without controlling, how to engage without attachment. Sweet dreams, dear friend. May you wake with hands a little more open, heart a little more spacious, and the gentle knowing that you are already free. You're just learning to remember it.